Well, hey guys, my name is Dr. Jordan Koss, and this is the Millennial Harbinger channel. What does Rahab have to do with re-enchanting our sexual ethics and helping us understand the mission and purpose of Jesus? Okay, so we're going to continue in this episode going through Michael Heiser's book, Reversing Herman. Really, really, really good book. If you haven't read it, you need to. And we're going to go through the chapter that kind of goes through each of the women mentioned in Jesus' genealogy from the Old Testament, that kind of shows us why they're mentioned in light of Genesis 6 and what the sons of God did there in the prologue of Scripture. And today we're going to cover the topic and person of Rahab. Now, Rahab, she's mentioned in the beginning of the book of Joshua. Interesting how it's like the first person really emphasized in the conquest narrative in Joshua is this Canaanite prostitute woman in Jericho, located within one of the cities that was devoted to destruction. And again, as Heiser shows us in his book Unseen Realm and touches on it here in Reversing Herman, the cities that were devoted to destruction particularly were related to the offspring or descendants of the Nephilim. So with that in mind, it kind of adds a lot to the story as we read this, especially about Rahab. Just an interesting observation. But she's found in Joshua chapter 2, where she hides the spies, etc. And then in chapter 6, where once they take the city, they keep their word, as Rahab keeps her word, and rescues Rahab and her family from Jericho without killing them, along with everything else that was devoted to destruction. And that's mainly where she's mentioned in the Old Testament, beyond just obviously being within the lineage of Jesus, the lineage of King David. In the New Testament, she's mentioned about 3 times. Obviously, the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1, the Hall of Faith, the chapter of faith in Hebrews 11, and then in James 2, where she's propped up and emphasized along with Abraham as a prime example of faith and actions working together. There you go. No, that's another just huge topic in and of itself right there, the relationship between faith and action, faith and works. And I really like Matthew Bates's stuff on that, but that's for another day, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to start reading this section on Rahab and make comments along the way, so that we can kind of see and how Heiser can help us understand how his observations about Rahab and her connection to the Watchers and the Enochic Watchers template that begins in Genesis 6, and how that can help us re-enchant our sexual ethics today, especially in light of this modern trend of affirming same-sex sexual behavior and lifestyles. Okay, here we go. So on page 78, in Reversing Herman, Heiser says, unlike Tamar, who took the guise of a prostitute to deceive Judah, Rahab was a working prostitute. Joshua 2, verse 1. She is one of 2, along with Ruth, unambiguous Gentiles among the 4 women, as she is a native Canaanite living in Jericho. The Enochic template element of sexual transgression is therefore quite transparent with her being a prostitute, right? But as with the Tamar episode, there's a lot more to Rahab and her story than that. That's less explicit, but lying just beneath the surface. Interesting how her story also, again, involves not only sex, but deception. And I have something else written down here, but I can't read it in the margin. But sex, yes, but also that that deceptive element as well, where she lied to the people of Jericho about the spies. Okay, anyway, here we go. Next paragraph. While it may sound odd to our ear, Rahab is also connected to the Enochic template by means of warfare, giants, and angels. Okay, Richter Again, Heiser keeps drawing on the dissertation by Amy Richter, the Enochic Watchers template in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. He quotes Richter here. Richter says, while Rahab herself does not take up weapons of war, her actions may make way for the Israelites to do so. Therefore, her story is connected with the illicit arts of war. Therefore, her story is connected with, I already said that. Clearly, in this context, these arts are not perceived within the narrative as negative for Rahab or the Israelites who engage in them directly. Rather, they are the necessary means by which Israel enters the promised land. Rahab's story then makes use of two categories of illicit arts identified in 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 1. Arts concerned with the making of war and the beautification of women. Okay? All right, end quote for Richter. Back to Heiser. The connection between Rahab and the giant clans, the second topic that Heiser says we see Rahab connected to warfare, one, which we just read that quote from Richter. Now, her connection with the giants, where can we see that? The connection between Rahab and the giant clans is implied by what follows in the conquest of Jericho and the wars against the giant clans. I've already briefly touched upon this. Jericho was one of the cities targeted for cherem, devoted to destruction, right? A command patterned by the detection of the Anakim by the spies prior to the wilderness wanderings, based in Numbers 13, 32 through 33. But Rahab's connection to giants seems to have entered the Jewish consciousness in another way, okay? Matthew refers to Rahab as the mother of Boaz by a man named Salmon, Matthew 1, verse 5. On the surface, Heiser says, nothing seems unusual, but Ruth 2:1 refers to Boaz as a gibor, one of the terms used to describe the Nephilim offspring of the sons of God in Genesis 6:4. On its own, gibor, plural giborim, or giborim, however you want to pronounce that. It might have the doggish forte in the middle, so it sounds like it'd be, I'm a little rusty on my Hebrew. On its own, gibor does not refer to giants. However, Jews in the Second Temple period often interpreted the term that way. The Septuagint, for example, translates the term with gigas, gigantes, giant or giants, singular and plural, over a dozen times, whether the context supports that rendering or not. The point being made here is not that Boaz was a giant. He wasn't, Heiser says. Rather, the point is that the description used by the author of Ruth drew the attention of Second Temple Jews, Matthew being one of them, and created a mental link between Rahab and the giant clans. So there's this just natural connection between Rahab and the giant clans that apparently Jews have seen, especially Second Temple Jews have seen just by being Rahab, right? Okay. So that's interesting. Just that implicit connection right there that Heiser points out. Number 3, connection with angels. What of the angel connection, Heiser says? This is detected in the Greek Septuagint translation of the Rahab account and in the New Testament. So turning the page to page 80, all right, this is about like a 2.5-page section on Rahab. In the New Testament letter of James, Rahab is paired with Abraham, as we've mentioned, as an example of one justified by works and not by faith alone, James 2:24. Rahab is named specifically in James 2:25. Was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers? There it uses the messengers is the Greek word angelus in the nominative singular. And so was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another road? End quote. The ambiguous word angelos, translated in many English translations of James 2:25 as messenger, is also the word used in the Septuagint for angel. The ambiguity is present in Hebrew as well, and in Joshua 6:25. The word Melachim, messenger, angel, is used to explain why Joshua spared the lives of the Canaanite Rahab and her family when the Israelites conquered the land and committed all other Canaanite people and animals to the ban. Quoting Joshua here, but Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, Joshua spared. She lives in Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Isn't it interesting? Like there's this like theme throughout the Old Testament story of like welcoming strangers, hiding strangers, messengers. Abraham, Lot. Now Rahab seems to be playing off of that too. And here Rahab is actually compared and contrasted, or just mainly compared with Abraham. Let's see, where did I leave off? It is interesting that the Septuagint does not use angelos in Joshua 6:25, but kataskopos. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Spy, the word for spy translated as spy instead. In other words, the writer of James is not quoting the Septuagint text, but rather makes use of the ambiguous angelos, which may connote messenger or angel, and thereby preserves the ambiguity of the Hebrew version of Joshua 6:25 with its Melachim. So, final paragraph here in Rahab section. It is also interesting to note that James uses both Rahab and Abraham as models of faith, both receiving messengers. Melachim, hospitably. And then cross-referencing Genesis 18:1 through 19:1, James 2:25. So that ends Heiser's section on Rahab. So Rahab and her story is connected to the Enochic Watchers template in many ways. She's mentioned in Jesus' genealogy. Rahab's connected to the Enochic Watcher template by means of warfare, giants, and angels. And she's mentioned in Jesus' genealogy as a way to emphasize the purpose of Jesus' mission in his incarnation, in his ministry, his death, burial, resurrection, to reverse the sins of the Watchers, or in Heiser's book's title, to reverse Hermon, because in the book of Enoch, the rebel Watchers came down and made that pact and covenant on Mount Hermon, which is why, again, and Heiser points this out, Jesus went to Mount Hermon in Matthew 17, the Mount of Transfiguration, to kind of make a point, right? Hey, I've come here to reverse everything that you guys did. Matthew 17 and 16 and 17 is an awesome story of what Jesus does there. And it's only in the backdrop, understanding what Jesus does there at that mountain, within the backdrop of that Enochic Watchers template, that you truly can, I think, really appreciate what's going on there, what Jesus does there. But Rahab, how does she help us reenchant our sexual ethic? Well, again, Rahab is mentioned in Jesus' genealogy with her connection to warfare, giants, and angels, the Enochic Watchers template, as a means of saying, hey, Jesus is going to reverse what those Watchers did in Genesis 6. And what does those Watchers do? Well, the first thing they did was break creation barrier by means of having sex with human women, which their goal, all of supernatural, rebel, evil, spiritual beings, their goal is to cause humanity, God's imagers on earth, to anti-image him, to act like them. And we see that happening in Sodom, with the men of Sodom and Gomorrah acting exactly like the Watchers in Genesis 6, right? That I think is the point. But by acting like the Watchers, homosexuality is in some sense, I think, highlighted, again, by the Sodom and Gomorrah story, and in other less explicit ways throughout the Old Testament, and by Paul in the New Testament. Because of that, it serves as just one of those main areas where we see how supernatural evil causes human imagers to anti-image God, the way the Watchers did in Genesis 6. I still need to keep digging and trying to further understand all that we can, I think, mine from these connections between the women and Jesus's mission, and as well as How do we further reenchant their sexual ethic? Because, in the words of Charles Taylor, we're disenchanted. Not meaning we're like, oh, everything stinks, but that we doubt and disbelieve in the supernatural. We've been Scooby-Dooified, according to the words of another author, I believe Richard Beck. And we need to reenchant our understanding of Scripture, rediscover the ancient supernatural worldview of the Bible, understand things the way ancient Jews did. And therefore, that's going to help us understand why ancient Jews and Christians understood homosexuality, same-sex sexual relations to be sinful. And therefore, here's a little jaunt through Heiser's book on the woman and character of Rahab and how she might help us do just that. All right, guys, I'm going to stop there. Thanks for watching to the end. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.